The blood-curdling screams pierced the early morning silence of Great Bend, Kansas, in the spring of 1874, as Grace Garrison stood frozen, staring at her husband Thomas's lifeless body sprawled across their bedroom floor, the smoking gun several feet away where it had clattered after being knocked from someone's grip. "Help! Somebody help us!" Grace finally found her voice, her nightdress spattered with the blood that had sprayed when the bullet tore through Thomas's chest. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound as if she could somehow force life back into his still form, but it was already too late. Thomas Garrison, wealthy cattle baron and respected businessman of Great Bend, was dead. The bedroom door burst open as the household staff rushed in, followed closely by Thomas's younger brother Harold, who had been staying with them for the past month. Harold took one look at the scene: Grace kneeling over Thomas, blood on her hands and clothing, the gun on the floor, and his face twisted with rage and grief. "What have you done?" he whispered, then louder, "What have you done?" Grace looked up, her blue eyes wide with shock. "I didn't. He was arguing with someone. I woke up and they were fighting. Liar." Harold lunged forward, grabbing Grace by the shoulders and yanking her away from Thomas's body. "You killed my brother. You killed him." "No." Grace struggled against his grip. "Harold, please." "Someone broke in. There was no one else here." Harold's voice rose to a shout that brought more people running. "You two were arguing about the will yesterday. I heard you. You wanted more control of his business and he refused. That's not what happened." Grace's voice broke as she stared down at her husband's blank eyes, still open and staring at nothing. "Thomas, oh God, Thomas." Within the hour, Sheriff Anderson arrived with his deputy. By then, the Garrison household was in chaos. Harold had already sent runners to notify Thomas's parents and 3 other siblings, while the housemaid had been dispatched to summon the doctor, though it was clear no medical help would revive Thomas Garrison. "She killed him," Harold insisted the moment the sheriff entered the bedroom where Thomas's body remained undisturbed. "My brother's wife shot him in his sleep. Look at her covered in his blood." Sheriff Anderson, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, turned to Grace, who sat trembling in a chair in the corner, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm spring morning. "Mrs. Garrison, I need to hear your side of things." Grace lifted her tear-streaked face. "I was sleeping. I heard Thomas arguing with someone, a man. Their voices woke me, but before I could fully wake there was a struggle. I saw a shadow, heard the gun go off." She shook her head. "The man fled through the window. I tried to help Thomas, but it was too late." "Convenient that no one else heard this mysterious intruder," Harold spat. "Thomas changed his will last month, Sheriff. He was planning to restrict her access to his funds. She couldn't have that." The sheriff's gaze moved to the open window. Was anything taken? Any valuables missing? Harold hesitated. "Not that I can tell, but that only proves my point. This wasn't a robbery. It was a murder." By noon, the rest of the Garrison family had descended upon the house. Thomas's parents' stern-faced Edward Garrison and his wire-thin wife Martha arrived first, followed by his sisters Alina and Louise with their husbands, and finally his older brother Frederick. They circled around Grace like vultures, their accusations growing louder with each passing hour. "She never loved him," Martha Garrison declared, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "She married him for his money. Everyone knows it. Thomas was too blinded by her pretty face to see her for what she truly was." "I did love him," Grace whispered, but no one seemed to hear her. The doctor confirmed what everyone already knew: Thomas Garrison had died from a single gunshot wound to the chest, fired at close range. The sheriff collected the gun, a small revolver that Thomas kept in the bedside table for protection, and noted that it had indeed been fired once. He questioned the house staff, but none had seen or heard an intruder. The only sounds that had roused them were the gunshot and Grace's screams afterward. "I'm placing you under house arrest for now, Mrs. Garrison," Sheriff Anderson told her quietly that evening. "Don't leave the premises until we sort this out." "Where would I go?" Grace asked hollowly, staring at the floor. "This is my home." "Not anymore," Edward Garrison announced, his deep voice filling the parlor where the family had gathered. "You're not welcome here, not after what you've done. We'll see you hang for this." For 3 days, Grace moved through the house like a ghost, shunned by the servants who had once respected her and openly despised by her husband's family, who had taken over the mansion and were already dividing Thomas's possessions among themselves. She was not permitted to attend the funeral preparations, and when she tried to enter the parlor where Thomas's body had been laid out, Harold physically blocked her path. "Haven't you done enough?" he hissed. "Let him rest in peace, murderer." On the morning of the 4th day, Grace was sitting alone in the garden, the only place she could find solace away from the accusing stares, when a shadow fell across her bench. Looking up, she saw a tall man she didn't recognize, dressed in the practical clothing of a working cowboy. His face was sun-browned beneath his hat, and he regarded her with keen hazel eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Mrs. Garrison." His voice was deep with a slight drawl. "My name is Adam Xavier. I worked for your husband." Grace nodded warily. "Mr. Xavier." "I'm sorry, but if you've come about business matters, you'll need to speak with my brother-in-law Harold. He's handling everything now." The man Adam shook his head. "I'm not here about business. I'm here about your husband's murder." Grace flinched at the word, but Adam continued before she could speak. "I don't believe you killed him." His words hung in the air between them. Grace stared at him, afraid to hope that anyone might actually believe her innocence. "Why would you say that?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam Xavier removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Because I know something about your husband that his family has been trying to keep quiet for years, and I think it got him killed." Grace gestured to the bench beside her. "Please, sit down and tell me what you know." Adam settled his tall frame onto the garden bench. "I've been working for the Garrison Ranch for 5 years now. Started as a regular hand, but Thomas noticed I had a good head for numbers and promoted me to help manage the cattle operations. I've traveled with him to cattle auctions across 3 states. "Yes, I believe he mentioned you," Grace said, a faint memory stirring. "He said you were reliable." A ghost of a smile crossed Adam's face. "High praise from Thomas." The smile faded quickly. "Mrs. Garrison, your husband was involved in some dealings that weren't entirely above board. Nothing illegal necessarily, but business arrangements that certain people wanted kept secret." "What kind of arrangements?" Grace leaned forward slightly. "Land deals, mostly. Thomas was quietly buying up properties all along the planned railroad extension, some using his own name, others through proxies. He stood to make a fortune when the railroad came through, but he'd stepped on some powerful toes in the process." Grace frowned. "But Thomas was already wealthy. Why would someone kill him over this?" "Because one of those powerful toes belonged to Judge Raymond Sullivan." Adam kept his voice low, even though they were alone in the garden. "And your husband was about to expose the judge's involvement in a fraudulent land scheme that cheated dozens of settlers out of their homesteads." Grace's eyes widened. "Judge Sullivan." "But he's the most respected man in the county," Adam finished for her, "and also the father of Harold's fiancée." "Caroline Sullivan," Grace murmured. "Harold has been courting her for months." "Exactly. And Harold has political ambitions that a connection to the Sullivan family would certainly help." Adam leaned closer. "Mrs. Garrison, The night before your husband was killed, I overheard him and Harold arguing fiercely in Thomas's study. Thomas threatened to expose the judge with or without Harold's approval. Grace felt a chill despite the warm sunshine. You think Harold killed Thomas? His own brother? Adam's expression remained grave. I don't know for certain. But I do know that Harold was seen meeting with Judge Sullivan that same evening at the Red Creek Saloon. They spoke privately for over an hour. But why would Harold kill Thomas? Even with the Sullivan connection, Thomas was helping fund Harold's political aspirations. That's what I aim to find out, Adam said. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. The Garrison family is pushing the sheriff to formally arrest you, and from what I hear, he's about ready to give in. Fear clutched at Grace's heart. Where could I possibly go? Everyone in town believes I killed my husband. My sister has a place outside of town. You'd be safe there while I gather evidence. Adam stood and offered his hand. Mrs. Garrison, I can't promise I'll be able to clear your name, but I believe you deserve a chance to prove your innocence. Grace hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. Why are you helping me, Mr. Xavier? You don't know me. Adam's hazel eyes held her steadily. Your husband was a complicated man, Mrs. Garrison, but he spoke of you with genuine affection. He trusted you, and that's good enough for me. Besides, he added, I don't like seeing the powerful crush those they consider expendable. You're being made a scapegoat while the real killer goes free. With a deep breath, Grace placed her hand in his. When do we leave? Tonight, Adam said, helping her to her feet. Pack only what you can carry without drawing attention. I'll meet you at the back garden gate at midnight. As Adam walked away, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced since the moment she found Thomas dead: hope, faint but persistent, that the truth might actually come to light. That night, Grace waited until the house grew quiet. The Garrisons had taken over the main bedrooms, relegating her to a small guest room as if she were already convicted and no longer mistress of her own home. She packed a single carpet bag with essentials: a change of clothes, her hairbrush, the locket Thomas had given her on their first anniversary, and the small amount of cash she kept in her jewelry box. Midnight came, and with it a soft rap at her bedroom window. Grace startled, then moved to open it. Adam Xavier was balanced on the trellis outside, his face half hidden in shadow. Can you climb down? He whispered. Grace glanced doubtfully at her skirts. I think so. I'll help you. Adam reached through the window, taking her carpet bag first. Hand me your things, then come through feet first. It was undignified and terrifying, climbing out a second-story window in the dark, but Grace managed it with Adam's assistance. His strong hands guided her safely to the ground, and together they slipped through the shadows of the garden to where two horses waited beyond the gate. Have you ridden before? Adam asked, securing her bag to one of the saddles. Yes, though not often in recent years, Grace admitted. Thomas preferred carriages. Adam helped her mount, then swung easily into his own saddle. We'll take it slow until we're well away from town. My sister's place is about 10 miles out, near the creek. They rode in silence through the sleeping town of Great Bend. Grace's heart pounded each time they passed a lighted window or heard voices from a saloon, expecting shouts of alarm to rise up behind them at any moment. But they reached the outskirts without incident, and only then did she let herself breathe more easily. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Kansas sky. As they left the town behind, Adam increased their pace to a steady trot. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her was soothing, and Grace found her thoughts clearing for the first time in days. Mr. Xavier, she said after they'd ridden for nearly an hour, if what you say is true about Judge Sullivan and Harold, why didn't Thomas confide in me? We didn't keep secrets from each other. Adam was quiet for a moment before answering. I believe he wanted to protect you. The less you knew, the safer you'd be if things went wrong. Well, they certainly went wrong, Grace said bitterly. And I wasn't safe at all. No, Adam agreed. And I'm sorry for that. Thomas was a shrewd businessman, but he underestimated how far some men will go to protect their interests. They crested a small rise, and Adam pointed to a light glimmering in the distance. That's my sister's place. We're almost there. The small homestead came into view as they approached a modest cabin with a barn and corral beside it. A woman emerged from the doorway as they rode into the yard, her silhouette outlined by the warm light behind her. Adam, is that you? Her voice carried clearly in the night air. It's me, Sophia, Adam called back. I've brought a guest. Sophia Xavier was several years younger than her brother, with the same dark hair and direct gaze, though her eyes were a deeper brown than Adam's hazel. She welcomed Grace without hesitation, ushering her into the cabin's warm interior while Adam tended to the horses. You must be exhausted, Mrs. Garrison, Sophia said, taking Grace's cloak. I've prepared a bed for you in the small room. It's not what you're used to, I'm sure. Please call me Grace, she interrupted. And any bed where I can sleep without fearing for my life is luxury enough. Thank you for taking such a risk by helping me. Sophia smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. Adam told me what happened. If he believes in your innocence, that's good enough for me. Besides, she added, pouring Grace a cup of tea, I've never thought much of how the Garrisons treat people they consider beneath them. Present company accepted, of course. Grace accepted the tea gratefully. Thomas wasn't like the rest of his family. He was kinder, more fair-minded. So Adam has said. Sophia motioned for Grace to sit at the small table. Rest now. Tomorrow you can tell me everything and we'll figure out what to do next. Grace slept deeply that night for the first time since Thomas's death. The simple cot in Sophia's spare room more restful than the grand bed she'd shared with her husband. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. Dressing quickly in her spare clothes, she emerged to find Adam and Sophia at the table, heads bent close together as they spoke in hushed tones. They looked up as she approached, and Adam rose to pull out a chair for her. Good morning, Mrs. Garrison. I hope you slept well. Better than I expected, Grace admitted, taking the offered seat. And please call me Grace. Sophia placed a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. Eat up. You'll need your strength. As Grace ate, Adam outlined what he'd learned during a brief visit to town at first light. They've noticed you're missing, he said. Sheriff Anderson has deputies searching the area. They're saying your disappearance confirms your guilt. Grace set down her fork. Of course they are. It's easier than admitting they might be wrong. There's more, Adam said, his expression grim. Harold Garrison has publicly accused you not only of murdering Thomas, but of stealing family heirlooms before you fled. There's a $500 reward for information leading to your capture. Heirlooms. Grace's voice rose in disbelief. What heirlooms? I took nothing but a change of clothes and my own personal items. They're making sure no one will shelter you, Sophia said quietly. Murderer and thief who would risk helping such a woman. Grace's appetite vanished. So what do we do now? We find evidence proving who really killed Thomas, Adam said firmly. I've been making inquiries carefully about Judge Sullivan's land dealings. There are records that could implicate him in fraud, records that Thomas had collected. In his study, Grace said, remembering. Thomas kept a locked box in the bottom drawer of his desk. He was very protective of it. Adam nodded. That's likely where he stored the evidence. We need to get into that study and find that box before Harold or the judge realizes what it contains if they haven't already. But how? Grace asked. The house is probably being watched. I can still move freely, Adam pointed out. I work for the Garrison ranch. No one would question me visiting the main house on business. It's too dangerous, Grace protested. If they suspect you're helping me, they won't, Adam assured her. Harold doesn't consider ranch hands worth noticing unless they're directly in his way. As long as I act appropriately deferential, he'll hardly glance my way. Grace wasn't convinced, but she recognized the determination in Adam's eyes. When will you go? Today. The sooner the better. Adam rose from the table. Sophia will stay with you. Don't leave the cabin, even to step outside. We can't risk anyone spotting you. After Adam departed, Grace helped Sophia with household chores, grateful for the distraction. The younger woman was a calming presence, practical and steady, with none of the nervous energy that characterized her brother. How long have you lived out here? Grace asked as they hung laundry inside near the fire, the threat of being seen preventing them from using the clothesline outside. 3 years, Sophia replied. It was our parents' place originally. They came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Pa died of fever 2 winters ago, and Ma followed 6 months later. Adam wanted me to sell up and move to town, but I prefer the solitude. It's peaceful, Grace agreed, looking around the simple but well-kept cabin. Though I imagine it gets lonely. Sophia shrugged. Adam visits often enough. And I've made friends with some of the farm families nearby. Speaking of which, she glanced out the window, her body tensing. We have company coming. Quick, into the back room. Grace hurried into the small bedroom, closing the door behind her but leaving it cracked open enough to hear. Moments later, a knock sounded at the cabin door. Morning, Miss Xavier, a male voice said. Sorry to trouble you. Deputy Miller, Sophia's voice remained calm. What brings you all the way out here? Looking for a fugitive, the deputy said. Grace Garrison escaped custody last night. Murdered her husband and stole some valuable items. Sheriff thought she might try to hide out in one of the outlying homesteads. How terrible, Sophia replied, and Grace marveled at how convincing she sounded. But I haven't seen anyone. Been here alone since yesterday when my brother visited. Mind if I have a look around? The deputy's voice hardened slightly. Just to be thorough. There was a brief pause before Sophia answered. I suppose that would be all right, though I don't appreciate the implication that I'd harbor a murderer. Grace's heart raced as she heard footsteps moving through the cabin. She looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the small room offered few options. She settled for dropping to the floor and rolling under the bed, pulling her skirts tightly around her legs to keep them from showing. The bedroom door swung open, and Grace held her breath as Boots stepped into the room. The deputy moved around slowly, opening the wardrobe, checking behind the door. For one terrifying moment, he paused beside the bed, and Grace was certain he would kneel down to look beneath it. Instead, after what seemed an eternity, he turned and walked out. Satisfied? Sophia asked, a hint of frost in her voice. For now, the deputy replied. If you see anything suspicious or if Mrs. Garrison attempts to contact you, send word to the sheriff immediately. She's considered dangerous. I'll be sure to do that, Sophia said, and Grace heard the cabin door open and close. She remained under the bed, afraid to move until Sophia came in several minutes later. He's gone, Sophia said, kneeling to peer under the bed. Rode off toward the Thompson place. Grace crawled out, brushing dust from her dress. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if no need to think about that, Sophia interrupted. But this confirms they're searching thoroughly. You'll need to be even more careful. The rest of the day passed in tense waiting. As evening approached with no sign of Adam, Grace found herself growing increasingly anxious. He should have been back by now, she said, pacing the small confines of the cabin. What if something's happened to him? Sophia, who was calmly mending a shirt, looked up. "Adam can take care of himself. He'll be back when it's safe to travel." As if summoned by her confidence, the sound of hoofbeats approached the cabin. Sophia moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. "It's him," she confirmed, setting aside her sewing. Adam entered the cabin looking tired but triumphant. He carried a small wooden box under one arm, which he placed on the table. "You found it," Grace breathed, stepping forward. "It wasn't easy," Adam said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. The study was locked, and Harold had posted one of the ranch hands as a guard. I had to wait until Harold left for town and then convince Simmons I had legitimate business inside. "How did you manage that?" Sophia asked, pouring her brother a cup of coffee. Adam grinned briefly. "Told him Thomas had asked me to prepare some figures on the spring cattle drive before he died, and I needed to retrieve my notes from the study. Simmons knows I handled a lot of the ranch accounts, so he believed me." Grace stared at the box. "Is it locked?" "Yes," Adam said, "but I found this in the desk drawer." He produced a small key. "Shall we see what Thomas thought was worth protecting?" With Grace and Sophia looking on, Adam unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside were several folders of papers, along with a leather-bound journal. "These are land deeds," Grace said, examining one of the documents. "Properties all along the proposed railroad route." "And these," Adam said, lifting another stack of papers, "appear to be correspondence between Judge Sullivan and various land agents. Look at this one." He passed a letter to Grace. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening. The judge was using his position to force homesteaders to sell their land for a fraction of its worth, threatening them with legal troubles if they refused. "And here's the proof that Harold knew about it," Adam added, pulling a document from another folder. "This is a partnership agreement between Sullivan, Harold Garrison, and 3 other men to form a company purchasing land ahead of the railroad announcement." "Thomas must have discovered their scheme," Grace murmured. "That's why he and Harold were arguing." "There's more," Adam said, opening the journal. "This is Thomas's private record of his investigation. Listen to this entry from 2 weeks before his death. Harold continues to insist that my concerns about Sullivan's methods are exaggerated. I fear my brother has become so entangled in Sullivan's web that he can no longer distinguish right from wrong. If I cannot persuade him to withdraw from this venture voluntarily, I will have no choice but to take the evidence to Governor Osborne directly." Grace sank into a chair, the full weight of what they'd discovered settling over her. So Thomas was killed to prevent him from exposing the scheme. But was it Harold who pulled the trigger, or Judge Sullivan, or someone working for them? Adam suggested. Thomas's final entry might hold the answer. He flipped to the last written page and read aloud. "Had a disturbing conversation with RS today." When pressed, he admitted that several homesteaders who refused to sell have met with accidents. "I confronted him about Williams in particular, whose death was ruled a suicide despite clear evidence to the contrary. Sullivan's response was chilling. He reminded me that accidents can befall anyone, even those of prominent standing. I take this as a direct threat, not only to myself but potentially to G as well. I must act quickly." "RS. Raymond Sullivan," Sophia said. "And G is you, Grace," Adam added softly. "Thomas was worried about your safety." Grace's hands trembled as she reached for the journal. "He never said a word to me. All those nights he was distant, preoccupied. I thought it was just business concerns." "He was trying to protect you," Adam said. "But it seems the threat was more immediate than he realized. This is evidence of corruption and possibly multiple murders," Sophia pointed out. "But how do we use it to clear Grace's name? The sheriff is unlikely to move against Judge Sullivan without substantial pressure." Adam's expression grew determined. We need to get this evidence to someone with authority higher than the local sheriff. The governor, perhaps, or a federal marshal. The nearest federal marshal's office is in Topeka, Sophia said. That's nearly 100 miles from here. Then that's where we'll go, Adam declared. I can have us ready to leave by morning. I should go alone, Grace protested. You've both risked enough for me already. If you're caught helping a fugitive, you wouldn't make it 10 miles on your own, Adam interrupted firmly. Every lawman in the county is looking for you. Besides, his voice softened slightly, I promised Thomas I'd look after the ranch's interests, and that includes seeing justice done. Sophia stood, her decision made. I'll pack provisions for the journey. If you leave before dawn, you can have a good head start before anyone realizes you're gone. What about you? Grace asked her. I'll stay here, Sophia answered. If anyone comes looking, I'll say Adam went to Hays City on ranch business. It's the opposite direction from Topeka, so it should buy you some time. As Sophia busied herself with preparations, Grace turned to Adam. Why are you really doing this? It can't just be because of a promise to Thomas. Adam's hazel eyes met hers directly. Because I believe in justice, Mrs. Garrison Grace. And because in the 5 years I worked for your husband, I saw a man who, despite his wealth and position, tried to do right by people. That's rare enough to be worth fighting for. What he didn't say, but what Grace could see in his steady gaze, was that he also believed in her innocence with a conviction that left no room for doubt. The realization warmed something inside her that had been cold since the moment she found Thomas dead. The journey to Topeka would be dangerous, with lawmen searching for Grace and the powerful men they were planning to expose potentially sending hired guns after them. But for the first time since she'd fled her home in the dark of night, Grace felt a sense of purpose replacing her fear. With Adam Xavier beside her and Thomas's evidence safely tucked away, she had a chance to clear her name and bring her husband's real killers to justice. They set out before dawn, as planned, with the precious box of evidence secured in Adam's saddlebags. Sophia hugged them both tightly before they mounted their horses. Be careful, she urged, and send word when you can. We will, Adam promised, adjusting his hat against the lightening eastern sky. Keep your rifle handy while we're gone. Sophia patted the weapon leaning against the doorframe. Always do. They rode east at a steady pace, avoiding main roads and keeping to less traveled paths through the rolling prairie. Adam clearly knew the territory well, navigating without hesitation even when there was no visible trail. Did you grow up around here? Grace asked as they paused to water the horses at a small stream around mid-morning. Adam nodded, scanning the horizon with watchful eyes. Born in Council Grove, but my family moved to Great Bend when I was 12. My father was a blacksmith until the war took his arm. After that, he turned to farming, though he never had quite the knack for it. Is that why you became a cowboy instead of following his trade? A brief smile crossed Adam's face. That and I never could stand being in one place too long. The open range suited me better. Yet you stayed with the Garrison ranch for 5 years, Grace observed. Thomas was a good boss, Adam said simply. Paid fair wages, treated his men with respect, made it worth staying put for a while. He looked at her curiously. What about you? How did a genteel lady like yourself end up married to a Kansas cattle baron? Grace laughed softly at his description. I'm hardly genteel. My father was a storekeeper in Abilene. I met Thomas when he came to purchase supplies for a cattle drive. He was charming, attentive. Different from the rough cowboys who usually pass through town. And you fell in love, Adam supplied. Not right away, Grace admitted, but he was persistent. He courted me properly, won my parents' approval. When he proposed after 6 months, it seemed the sensible choice. She looked away, remembering. The love came later as we built our life together. Thomas wasn't a demonstrative man, but he was kind, and he valued my opinions on matters most men wouldn't discuss with their wives. That couldn't have sat well with his family, Adam observed. It didn't, Grace confirmed. The Garrisons have very traditional views about a woman's place. Martha Garrison never forgave me for putting ideas in Thomas's head, as she put it. She blamed me when he began implementing more progressive practices on the ranch and in his businesses. Like promoting a common cowhand to help manage the cattle operation, Adam asked with a hint of wry humor. Exactly like that, Grace agreed, smiling slightly before her expression sobered. Thomas believed in judging people by their abilities, not their background or other circumstances. Adam's keen eyes studied her face. You miss him. I do, she said simply. Despite what his family thinks, I loved my husband, Mr. Xavier. Adam, he corrected gently. If we're going to be fugitives together, we might as well use first names. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Adam tensed, instantly alert. Riders coming, he said in a low voice. Could be just travelers, but we can't take the chance. This way. He led them quickly from the stream into a stand of cottonwoods, where the dense spring foliage provided cover. They dismounted, and Adam calmed the horses with practiced hands, preventing them from nickering and giving away their position. From their hiding place, they watched as 4 men rode past on the trail they had recently left. Grace's breath caught as she recognized the lead rider, Deputy Miller, the same man who had searched Sophia's cabin. The others were strangers to her, but they wore deputy badges as well. They're following our trail, Adam whispered once the riders had passed out of earshot. We'll need to be more careful. How did they find us so quickly? Grace wondered. Someone must have seen us leaving Sophia's place or spotted us on the road. Adam's expression was grim. We'll need to change course. Head northeast for a while before turning back toward Topeka. It'll add time to our journey, but it might throw them off our trail. They waited until they were certain the search party was well away before emerging from their hiding place. Adam studied the ground carefully. They're heading east, following our tracks. Let's head north through that creek bed. The water will hide our trail for a while. They rode through the shallow creek for nearly a mile before emerging onto harder ground where their horses' hooves would leave less obvious tracks. The detour cost them precious time, but by midday, there was no further sign of pursuit. They made camp that night in a small ravine that offered protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Adam built a tiny, nearly smokeless fire, just enough to heat coffee and warm the beans and biscuits Sophia had packed for them. We're making good time despite the detour, he said as they ate their simple meal. If we maintain this pace, we should reach Topeka in 4 or 5 days. Grace nodded, trying not to show how the unaccustomed hours in the saddle had left her sore and exhausted. Do you think the marshal will believe us? We're accusing a county judge and one of the wealthiest men in Great Bend of murder and corruption. The evidence speaks for itself, Adam said confidently. Thomas was thorough in his documentation. Besides, Judge Sullivan has enemies in high places. 2 men who have suspected his dealings weren't entirely honest but lacked proof. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the rustle of grass in the breeze, the distant yip of coyotes, the occasional hoot of an owl. Despite the circumstances, Grace found a strange peace in the vastness of the open land beneath the star-strewn sky. I never spent nights outdoors like this with Thomas, she mused. He preferred hotels, even on his cattle-buying trips. The comforts of civilization, Adam said with a slight smile. Can't say I blame him. though there's something to be said for sleeping under the stars." "Yes, there is," Grace agreed, looking up at the glittering canopy above them. "It makes our troubles seem smaller somehow, doesn't it? As if the sky is reminding us that our lives are just moments in something much larger." Adam studied her across the small fire, his expression thoughtful. "You surprise me, Grace Garrison. Most women of my acquaintance would be complaining about the lack of proper accommodations, not waxing philosophical about the stars." "Perhaps you've been acquainted with the wrong sort of women," Grace suggested with a touch of humor. Adam's laugh was warm and genuine. "Perhaps I have." They set out again at first light, continuing their northeasterly course. The day was clear but windy, the spring breeze carrying the scent of new growth across the prairie. By mid-morning, they had reached more populated farmland, where neat homesteads dotted the landscape. "We should avoid the farms," Adam advised. "Too many curious eyes." But fate had other plans. As they skirted a wheat field, Grace's horse suddenly stumbled, letting out a distressed whinny. She managed to keep her seat, but when they halted to examine the horse, Adam's expression turned concerned. "She's favoring her right foreleg," he said, running his hands carefully down the limb. The horse flinched when he touched the fetlock. "Looks like a sprain. She can't continue carrying a rider without making it worse." "What do we do?" Grace asked, dismayed. Adam glanced around, his gaze settling on a farmhouse visible in the distance. "We need another horse. Wait here with her while I ride ahead and see if that farmer might be willing to sell or trade." "Is that wise?" Grace's worry was evident. "What if they recognize me?" "Stay out of sight in those trees." Adam pointed to a small copse nearby. "I'll handle this." Reluctantly, Grace agreed. She led her limping horse into the shelter of the trees while Adam rode toward the farmhouse. From her vantage point, she watched as he approached the modest structure and was met by a man who emerged from a nearby barn. The two men conversed for several minutes, with Adam gesturing occasionally back toward the trees. Eventually, they walked together to a small corral where several horses grazed. After examining the animals, Adam and the farmer shook hands. The farmer then helped Adam saddle one of the horses, a sturdy-looking bay gelding. A woman appeared from the farmhouse, carrying what looked like a bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Adam, who tipped his hat in thanks before mounting his horse and leading the bay back toward Grace's hiding place. "Good news," Adam called as he approached. "Mr. Erickson was willing to trade horses. He also has a daughter about your size who's outgrown some clothes. His wife thought you might appreciate a change." Grace emerged from the trees, leading her limping mount. "That was kind of them, did you? Tell them who I am." "I said you were my sister, and we were traveling to visit family in Topeka when your horse was injured," Adam explained. "They're good people, not the type to ask too many questions." They transferred Grace's saddle to the bay gelding, and Adam arranged to leave the injured horse with Erickson to recover. "Did they mention anything about a fugitive woman?" Grace asked quietly as they rode away from the farm. "Not a word," Adam replied. "Which could mean they haven't heard the news, or they simply didn't connect my sister with the search for Grace Garrison." "Either way, we were fortunate," Grace said, adjusting to the stride of her new mount. They traveled steadily for the next 2 days, avoiding towns and larger settlements, camping in secluded locations each night. Adam proved to be not only a skilled guide but a surprisingly good cook, making the most of their limited provisions. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat beside their small campfire, a comfortable companionship had developed between them. Adam shared stories of his years working cattle drives, while Grace spoke of her childhood in Abilene and her adjustment to life as a wealthy rancher's wife. I never quite fit in with the other society women, she admitted. I wasn't raised to be idle, and I found their endless gossip and social calls tedious. Thomas understood that, at least. He encouraged me to assist with the ranch accounts and correspondence. That couldn't have endeared you to his family either, Adam observed. Martha once told me I was putting on airs by involving myself in business matters, Grace said with a wry smile. As if understanding figures and writing proper letters were somehow above my station. The Garrisons have always been particular about what they consider proper, Adam agreed, though Thomas seemed to break from that tradition in more ways than one. A comfortable silence fell between them as the fire crackled softly. After a moment, Adam spoke again, his voice more hesitant than usual. Grace, there's something I should tell you, something I've been thinking about since we found Thomas's journal. She looked at him expectantly. What is it? That last entry where Thomas mentioned his concern for your safety. Adam paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe that's why he changed his will. Grace frowned. What do you mean? Harold said Thomas changed the will to restrict my access to his money. That's what Harold claimed, Adam corrected. But I happened to be at the ranch office when Thomas's lawyer visited about a month before his death. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I overheard enough to know Thomas was arranging for you to have independent control of significant assets enough to ensure your security even if something happened to him. Why would he do that without telling me? I think he was trying to protect you from exactly what's happening now, his family trying to control you through financial means. Adam's expression was somber in the firelight. Thomas suspected they might try to challenge his will if anything happened to him. By setting aside assets in your name before his death, he was ensuring they couldn't leave you destitute. Grace absorbed this revelation slowly. So when Harold claimed Thomas was restricting my access to money, he was lying, Adam confirmed. Creating a narrative that would make your supposed motive for murder more believable. But why hasn't Thomas's lawyer come forward with the truth? Edgar Simmons. Adam shook his head. He's Judge Sullivan's brother-in-law. I doubt he's eager to contradict the story Harold and the judge are promoting. Grace stared into the fire, processing this new information. All this time, Thomas was trying to protect me, and I had no idea of the danger he was facing. Her voice caught. If only he had confided in me. He was trying to shield you, Adam said gently. Men like Thomas often believe they can solve problems without burdening those they care about. And instead, he left me vulnerable to his killer's schemes, Grace said bitterly. Adam reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. Not entirely. He left evidence that could expose them. And, he added with a slight squeeze of her hand, you're not facing this alone. The warmth of his touch and the sincerity in his voice brought unexpected comfort. Grace turned her hand beneath his, returning the gentle pressure before they both withdrew. Thank you, Adam, she said softly, for everything. The next morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. They broke camp quickly, hoping to make significant progress before the storm hit. By mid-morning, they reached a small settlement little more than a general store, a smithy, and a handful of houses clustered around a crossroads. Adam halted in a copse of trees just outside the town limits. We need supplies, he said, surveying the settlement. And information. If you stay out of sight here, I can be in and out quickly. Grace nodded, though she disliked the idea of separation. Be careful. Someone might recognize you. I'm not exactly memorable, Adam said with a self-deprecating smile. Just another cowboy passing through. He rode into the settlement while Grace remained hidden among the trees. The wait seemed interminable, each passing minute stretching her nerves tighter. When Adam finally returned nearly an hour later, his expression was grim. "News travels fast," he said as he dismounted. "There are wanted posters up with your description. The reward has been increased to $1,000. Grace felt her heart sink. "Did anyone seem suspicious of you?" "I don't think so. I kept conversation to a minimum, just another traveler restocking supplies." He began transferring items from his saddlebags: coffee, flour, bacon, and other necessities. "But there's more concerning news. Harold Garrison and Judge Sullivan are in the area." "What? How is that possible?" "According to the storekeeper, they're leading a search party about 15 miles south of here. They must have guessed we'd head toward Topeka." Adam's expression was troubled. "They're closing in from the south, and there are lawmen from 3 counties joining the search." Fear clutched at Grace's heart. "We should change direction again." "No," Adam said firmly. "That's what they'll expect. Our best chance is to push straight through to Topeka as quickly as possible. We're only about a day's ride away now." The first fat raindrops began to fall as they mounted up and continued eastward. Within an hour, the gentle rainfall had transformed into a driving downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards and turned the trail to mud. They pressed on, huddled in their slickers, the horses picking their way carefully through the increasingly treacherous terrain. By late afternoon, they were thoroughly soaked and chilled to the bone. The storm showed no signs of abating, and Grace could see Adam scanning the landscape for shelter. "There," he finally called over the roar of the rain, pointing toward what appeared to be an abandoned homestead. "We can wait out the worst of it there." The structure proved to be a dilapidated cabin, its roof partially collapsed in one corner, but the remainder intact enough to provide shelter from the relentless rain. Adam tended to the horses in the adjacent lean-to while Grace assessed the cabin's interior. Despite the dust and cobwebs, the central portion remained dry and the stone fireplace appeared sound. "Whoever lived here left in a hurry," she observed when Adam entered, shaking water from his hat. "There's still furniture, even dishes in the cupboard." "Not uncommon," Adam said, kneeling to examine the fireplace. "Homesteading is a hard life. Many give up after a bad harvest or illness." He found the chimney clear and began arranging kindling from a stack of wood someone had left beside the hearth. "We're in luck. This wood is old but dry enough to burn." Soon a small fire was crackling in the grate, its warmth a welcome relief after hours in the cold rain. They hung their sodden outer garments near the fire and spread a blanket on the floor to sit on. "The storm looks to be settling in for the night," Adam observed, glancing out the cabin's single grimy window at the darkening sky. "We'll have to wait till morning to continue." Grace huddled closer to the fire, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Despite removing her wet coat, her dress was damp through, and her hair hung in dripping tendrils around her face. "You should change into those dry clothes Mrs. Erickson gave you," Adam suggested. "I'll step outside for a few minutes." "There's no need to stand in the rain," Grace protested. "You can turn your back. I trust you." Adam hesitated, then nodded, moving to face the wall farthest from where Grace stood. She quickly changed into the simple calico dress, grateful for the dry fabric against her skin. The garment was plain but well made, and though slightly loose, it fit well enough. "You can turn around now," she said when she was decent. Adam turned, his gaze taking in her transformed appearance. "Better, much," she acknowledged. "Though I'm afraid your clothes are as wet as mine were." "I'm used to it," he shrugged. "Part of life on the range." Nevertheless, he removed his sodden vest and shirt, hanging them near the fire beside Grace's dress. In his undershirt, the lean strength of his arms and shoulders was more evident. And Grace found herself noticing the way the firelight played across his features, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the quiet intensity of his hazel eyes. They shared a simple meal of the supplies Adam had purchased, supplemented with coffee that drove away the last of the chill. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the cabin walls and wind howling through the gaps in the roof's far corner. Strange, isn't it? Grace mused, staring into the flames. A week ago I was mistress of one of the finest houses in Great Bend. Now I'm a fugitive sharing an abandoned cabin with a cowboy I barely knew before all this began. Life has a way of upending our expectations, Adam agreed. Though I can't say I expected to be harboring my boss's widow while fleeing from the law either. Despite everything, Grace found herself smiling at his dry humor. When we reach Topeka tomorrow, assuming the marshal believes us, what then? Adam considered the question. If the evidence is deemed credible, they'll likely arrest Sullivan and Harold. There would be a trial. You'd need to testify. And if we're caught before we reach Topeka, Grace's smile faded. That's not going to happen, Adam said with quiet determination. How can you be so certain? Half the lawmen in Kansas seem to be looking for us. Because I made a promise, Adam said simply. Not just to Thomas, though that's part of it, but to myself, and to you. Something in his voice made Grace look up, meeting his steady gaze across the fire. Why? She asked softly. Why risk everything for me? The truth now, Adam. Adam was silent for a long moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but unwavering. I've admired you from a distance for years, Grace. Not just for your beauty, though there's that too, but for your spirit, your kindness, the way you treated everyone at the ranch with respect, regardless of their station, how you brought books to Sophia when you learned she enjoyed reading. He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. I kept my distance out of respect for Thomas. He was a good man and you were his wife, but I can't pretend I didn't feel something even then. Grace stared at him, stunned by his confession. I had no idea. I made sure of that, Adam said with a rueful smile. It wasn't my place to have such feelings, let alone act on them. And now? He shook his head. Now is hardly the time either with everything you're going through. I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. You haven't, Grace assured him, surprised to find it was true. Something had been growing between them during their journey, a connection that went beyond their shared purpose. It's unexpected and complicated. Life usually is, Adam observed. He added more wood to the fire, giving her space to absorb his words. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Grace nodded, arranging her blanket near the fire's warmth. As she settled down, she found herself studying Adam's profile as he kept watch by the window. There was a steadiness to him that brought comfort in the midst of chaos, a quiet strength that had become her anchor in the storm that had engulfed her life. Sleep came slowly, her mind turning over Adam's confession and her own confused feelings. Thomas had been dead less than 2 weeks. Was it disloyal to feel this growing attachment to another man so soon? Or was it simply the heightened circumstances throwing them together, creating an illusion of connection that would fade once the danger passed? She woke sometime in the night to find Adam had dozed off sitting against the wall, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the cabin in soft, flickering shadows. Without fully considering her actions, Grace rose and placed her blanket over him, careful not to wake him. As she turned to return to her place, his hand caught hers gently. "You'll be cold," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You needed it more." Instead of releasing her hand, he tugged slightly. There's room for both of us to sit against the wall. We can share. Grace hesitated only a moment before settling beside him, the blanket draped over both of them. His arm slipped around her shoulders, a gesture that felt both protective and tentative, as if he was unsure of his welcome. "Is this all right?" he asked softly. In answer, she leaned slightly into his side, her head finding a natural resting place against his shoulder. "Yes," she murmured. "It's all right." They sat that way until dawn, drifting in and out of sleep, the storm gradually subsiding outside as the hours passed. When morning light finally filtered through the grimy window, Grace found herself reluctant to move from the comfort of Adam's embrace. Reality, however, would not be denied. They had one more day of travel before reaching Topeka, and the dangers they faced remained very real. With a small sigh, Grace straightened, and Adam's arm fell away from her shoulders. "We should get moving," she said, rising to her feet. Adam nodded, folding the blanket before checking their supplies. "The rain has stopped, but the trails will be muddy. We'll need to be careful." They ate a quick breakfast, then gathered their now dry clothing and prepared to depart. As Adam saddled the horses, Grace took one last look around the abandoned cabin that had provided such timely shelter. "Whoever lived here," she said when Adam returned, "I hope they found a better life elsewhere." "Some dreams don't work out the way we plan," Adam replied. "But that doesn't mean new ones can't take their place." The day was clear and cool after the storm, the washed landscape brilliant with spring green. They rode steadily eastward, the horses refreshed after their night of rest. By mid-morning, they began to see more signs of civilization: well-maintained farms, regular road markers, the occasional traveler passing by. "We're getting close to more populated areas," Adam warned. "Keep your head down when we encounter others. That bonnet of Mrs. Erickson's should help hide your face." Grace adjusted the sunbonnet, grateful for the concealing brim. "How much farther to Topeka?" "If we maintain this pace, we should reach the outskirts by late afternoon," Adam estimated. "The federal marshal's office is near the state capitol building." They stopped briefly at noon to rest the horses and eat a cold meal. Adam seemed increasingly vigilant, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings, his posture alert even as they rested. "Something's bothering you," Grace observed. "What is it?" "It's too quiet," Adam said, frowning. "We haven't seen any search parties all day, no lawmen on the roads." "Isn't that good? Perhaps they've given up." Adam shook his head. "Men like Harold Garrison and Judge Sullivan don't give up when their reputations and freedom are at stake. They're planning something." His unease proved prophetic. As they crested a hill in mid-afternoon, the spires and buildings of Topeka visible in the distance, Adam suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for Grace to stop as well. "Look there," he said in a low voice, pointing to the road ahead where it passed through a narrow valley between two wooded hills. "See the glint of sunlight on metal. There are men waiting in those trees." Grace squinted, barely making out what might have been the barrel of a rifle partially hidden among the foliage. "An ambush. Appears so," Adam confirmed grimly. "They must have guessed we were heading for the federal marshal and positioned men to intercept us. What do we do now?" Grace asked, fear tightening her throat. Adam studied the landscape intently. "There's another way into the city, but it's longer and rougher terrain. We'd have to circle north through those hills." He gestured to a line of rugged elevations to their right, then approach from the northeast. "It would add hours to our journey." "But it might be our only option," Grace pointed out. Adam nodded. "Let's move back down this slope before they spot us. We'll cut through that ravine to the north." They retreated carefully, keeping the hill between themselves and the waiting ambush. Once out of potential sight, They urged their horses to a faster pace, angling northward toward the hill country Adam had indicated. The terrain quickly grew more challenging: rocky slopes, dense patches of trees, streams swollen from the previous night's rainfall. Their progress slowed considerably as they picked their way through the difficult landscape. "I'm sorry for the delay," Adam said as they paused to let the horses drink from a clear stream, "but better slow than captured." "I trust your judgment," Grace assured him. "You've kept us safe this far." As the afternoon waned, they finally began to descend from the hills toward more level ground. Topeka spread out before them, the Kansas River winding along its northern edge, the dome of the Capitol building prominent among the city structures. "We made it," Grace breathed, relief flooding through her. "Not quite yet," Adam cautioned. "We still need to reach the marshal's office without being spotted." They approached the city cautiously, staying to less traveled streets as they made their way toward the center of town. Dusk was falling, the lengthening shadows providing additional cover as they moved through the outskirts of Topeka. "The federal building is just ahead," Adam said as they turned onto a broader avenue. "We'll leave the horses at that livery stable and proceed on foot, less conspicuous that way." They had just dismounted at the livery when a voice called out behind them, "That's far enough, Xavier." Adam turned slowly, pushing Grace slightly behind him. Harold Garrison stood 20 feet away, flanked by two men with badges: deputies from Great Bend. All three had weapons drawn. "How did you find us?" Adam asked, his body tense but his voice steady. Harold's smile was cold. "Did you really think we wouldn't have men watching all approaches to the city? A telegraph from our lookout in the North Hills reached me an hour ago. We've been waiting for you." His gaze shifted to Grace. "Hello, sister-in-law. You've led us on quite a chase." "It's over, Harold," Grace said, stepping out from behind Adam. "We have evidence of what you and Judge Sullivan have been doing: the land fraud, the threats, Thomas's murder." Harold's expression hardened. "Evidence? You mean the ravings of a desperate woman and a lovesick cowboy? Who do you think people will believe, you or respected members of Kansas society?" "The federal marshal can decide that," Adam countered, "once he sees what Thomas documented." At the mention of documentation, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Harold's face. "What exactly do you think you have?" "Thomas's journal," Grace said. "Records of all the land transactions, correspondence with Judge Sullivan, everything." "Hand it over," Harold demanded, taking a step forward. "Now." "Not a chance," Adam replied. "This is going to the proper authorities." The standoff might have continued, but at that moment the livery owner emerged from the stable, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, the drawn weapons, the tension, and his eyes widened. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "No gunplay on my property. I'll fetch the law. I am the law," one of the deputies with Harold snapped, brandishing his badge. "Stay out of this, old man." But the distraction was enough. In one swift movement, Adam grabbed Grace's hand and pulled her toward the entrance of a narrow alleyway beside the livery. "Run," he urged, and they bolted into the shadowed passage. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by the crack of a pistol shot. Grace felt something tug at her sleeve but kept running, Adam's hand firmly gripping hers as they navigated the dark alley. They emerged onto another street, this one busier with early evening foot traffic. Adam immediately guided them into the flow of pedestrians, slowing their pace to avoid drawing attention. "The federal building is 2 blocks that way," he murmured close to her ear. "We need to reach it before they cut us off." They moved as quickly as they dared through the crowded street, Adam's arm protectively around Grace's shoulders, steering her through the throng. Behind them, they could hear raised voices and occasional shouts as Harold and his men pushed through the crowd in pursuit. The imposing stone federal building came into view ahead, its entrance flanked by tall columns. As they hurried toward it, Grace saw Harold and one of the deputies emerge from a cross street, immediately spotting them. "There they are," Harold shouted, raising his pistol. Several pedestrians screamed at the sight of the weapon, scattering in all directions. The chaos provided momentary cover as Adam and Grace raced up the steps of the federal building. Behind them, another shot rang out, the bullet striking the stone column inches from Adam's head. They burst through the doors into a high-ceilinged lobby where several uniformed men immediately responded to the commotion. Adam raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "Federal Marshal," he called out. "We need to see the Federal Marshal immediately. There are armed men pursuing us." A tall, broad-shouldered man in a marshal's uniform stepped forward, hand on his holstered pistol. "I'm Deputy Marshal James Watkins. What's this about?" Before Adam could explain, the doors flew open again and Harold rushed in, his gun still drawn. The deputies flanking him hesitated when they saw the federal lawmen. "These two are fugitives from justice," Harold declared. "This woman murdered my brother in Great Bend. We have warrants for their arrest." Deputy Marshal Watkins held up a hand. "Lower your weapon, sir. This is a federal building." "I am Harold Garrison of Great Bend," Harold said imperiously. "My family is well known throughout Kansas. This woman is my brother's widow, and she shot him in his sleep 2 weeks ago." "That's a lie," Grace said firmly. "Thomas was murdered by men working for Harold and Judge Sullivan to prevent him from exposing their land fraud scheme. We have evidence." She gestured to Adam's saddlebag, which contained the precious documents. Watkins looked between the two parties, his expression giving nothing away. "All of you come with me. Marshal Bridges will sort this out." He gestured to his men. "Collect their weapons." Under the watchful eyes of several deputy marshals, both parties were escorted to a large office on the building's second floor. The nameplate on the door read, "Chief Marshal Elijah Bridges." Inside, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard sat behind a massive desk. "What's the disturbance, Watkins?" he asked, looking up from his paperwork. Deputy Watkins explained the situation briefly, concluding with, "Both parties claim the other is lying, sir. There appears to be evidence involved." Marshal Bridges leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes assessing each person in turn. "I'll hear from the lady first," he decided. "Mrs. Garrison, is it?" Grace stepped forward, painfully aware of her travel-stained appearance and borrowed clothes. "Yes, sir. Grace Garrison of Great Bend. Tell me why you're in my office instead of at home mourning your husband." With remarkable composure, Grace recounted the events of the past 2 weeks, finding Thomas dead, being accused by his family, fleeing with Adam when it became clear she would be arrested without a fair hearing, and finally, discovering the evidence that pointed to the real killers. "My husband was preparing to expose a land fraud scheme involving his brother Harold and Judge Raymond Sullivan," she concluded. "They were using their positions to force homesteaders off valuable land along the planned railroad route. When Thomas threatened to take evidence to the governor, he was murdered." "Preposterous," Harold interrupted. "She's inventing wild tales to save herself. My brother would never accuse a respected judge of fraud." "Let her finish," Marshal Bridges said firmly. "You'll have your turn." Adam stepped forward, placing Thomas's lockbox on the marshal's desk. "Everything is here, sir. Thomas Garrison's journal, correspondence, land records, all documenting the scheme and the threats made against him." Marshal Bridges opened the box and began examining the contents, his expression growing more serious as he read through several documents. After a long silence, he looked up at Harold. "Mr. Garrison, These papers contain some very troubling allegations against you and Judge Sullivan. Your brother seems to have kept meticulous records." Harold's confidence wavered visibly. Those could be forgeries. She could have created them after killing Thomas to divert suspicion. "In the 2 weeks she's been fleeing across the countryside?" Marshal Bridges asked skeptically. "That seems unlikely." He turned to one of his deputies. "Watkins, send a telegram to the sheriff in Great Bend. I want to know if Judge Sullivan is still in town or if he's conveniently disappeared." "He's leading a search party looking for them," Harold said quickly. "That's all. We'll see." Marshal Bridges continued examining the documents. "Mrs. Garrison, this journal indicates your husband believed his life was in danger. Did he express these concerns to you directly?" "No," Grace admitted. "He was trying to protect me by keeping me uninformed. I only learned the full extent of the situation after his death, through Mr. Xavier and these documents." The marshal turned his attention to Adam. "And you, Mr. Xavier, what was your role in all this?" "I worked for Thomas Garrison for 5 years, sir, managed part of his cattle operation. I was aware that he was investigating something sensitive involving his brother and Judge Sullivan, but I didn't know the details until after his death. When I realized Mrs. Garrison was being framed for a murder she didn't commit, I felt obligated to help her reach federal authorities with the evidence." "A very convenient story," Harold sneered. "This ranch hand has been infatuated with my brother's wife for years. Everyone at the ranch knew it. They conspired to kill Thomas and run off together." "That's not true," Grace protested. Marshal Bridges held up a hand for silence. "The facts will speak for themselves one way or another." He turned to Harold. "Mr. Garrison, you're free to return to your hotel, but don't leave Topeka. I'll need to question you further once I've reviewed all this evidence." "You're letting them go?" Harold demanded incredulously. "No," Marshal Bridges corrected. "Mrs. Garrison and Mr. Xavier will remain in federal custody until this matter is resolved. But based on what I've seen so far, there are legitimate questions about your brother's death that warrant a federal investigation, particularly given the involvement of a county judge." Harold's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. The Garrison family has been respected in Kansas for 3 generations. You can't possibly take the word of a murdering woman and a common cowhand over mine." "In this office, Mr. Garrison," Marshal Bridges said coldly, "what matters is evidence, not family name or social standing. Now, unless you want to join them in custody, I suggest you leave and let me do my job." Defeated for the moment, Harold stormed out, accompanied by a deputy marshal who had instructions to ensure he actually returned to his hotel. Once he had gone, Marshal Bridges addressed Grace and Adam. "You two have taken an enormous risk bringing this to me. If what you've shown me proves true, there will be serious consequences for some powerful people in Kansas." "We understand, sir," Adam said, "but the risk of doing nothing was greater." "Indeed." The marshal studied them thoughtfully. "You'll need to remain under protection while we investigate. I'll arrange secure accommodations and guards. In the meantime, I suggest you both get some rest. You look like you've had a difficult journey." True to his word, Marshal Bridges arranged for them to stay in a guarded boarding house used by the federal marshals for protected witnesses. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Grace had a proper bed, clean clothes, and a sense of security. The next morning, they were summoned back to the marshal's office. Bridges looked even more serious than he had the previous day. "We received responses to our telegrams," he informed them. "Judge Sullivan has disappeared. He was supposedly leading a search party for you, Mrs. Garrison, but no one has seen him for 2 days. More tellingly, he emptied his bank accounts before vanishing." "That certainly suggests guilt," Adam observed. Indeed it does, the marshal agreed. We've also located 2 witnesses who saw a man matching the description of Sullivan's personal assistant, Peter Caldwell, near the Garrison property on the night of the murder. Caldwell is also missing. Thomas mentioned Caldwell in his journal, Grace recalled. He described him as Sullivan's enforcer. We're dispatching marshals to Great Bend today to continue the investigation and apprehend Harold Garrison, Bridges continued. In the meantime, you'll both need to remain under protection. There may still be people loyal to Sullivan who would prefer this evidence never reaches a courtroom. For the next week, Grace and Adam remained in protective custody, providing detailed statements and helping the marshals understand Thomas's documentation. During this enforced confinement, their connection continued to deepen. Without the constant threat of pursuit, they had time to talk, to learn more about each other beyond the circumstances that had thrown them together. "What will you do when this is over?" Adam asked one evening as they sat in the small garden behind the boarding house, watched over discreetly by a deputy marshal. Grace considered the question. "I'm not sure. I can't imagine returning to Great Bend. There are too many painful memories now. You could sell the ranch," Adam suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." "Perhaps," Grace agreed, "though I'd need someone knowledgeable to help me assess its proper value." She glanced at him with a small smile. "Someone who understands cattle operations and land values." Adam returned her smile. "I might know someone suitable." The warmth in his gaze made her heart beat faster. Over the past weeks, something undeniable had grown between them, a bond forged in danger and mutual trust that had gradually transformed into deeper feelings. "Adam," she began hesitantly, "what you said that night in the cabin about having admired me from a distance, I've been thinking about it." "Have you now?" His voice was gentle, encouraging. "Yes, and I realized that I've been noticing you too in my own way, even before all this happened. The way you spoke to people at the ranch, how respectfully you treated everyone, it made an impression." She looked down at her hands. "Thomas and I had a good marriage, but it was comfortable rather than passionate. I mourned him sincerely, and I still do, but what I feel for you is different." "It's Mrs. Garrison," a voice interrupted. They looked up to see Deputy Watkins approaching. "Marshal Bridges would like to see you both immediately. There's been a development." At the federal building, they found Marshal Bridges looking grimly satisfied. "We've arrested Harold Garrison," he announced without preamble. "And more importantly, we've apprehended Peter Caldwell trying to cross into Indian territory. He's confessed to killing Thomas Garrison on Judge Sullivan's orders." Grace felt a wave of emotions: relief, vindication, and a fresh surge of grief for Thomas. Adam's hand found hers, offering silent support. "What exactly did Caldwell say?" Adam asked. "He claims Sullivan ordered him to intimidate Thomas Garrison, to frighten him into abandoning his investigation. He broke into your home that night while you were sleeping," Bridges nodded to Grace, "and confronted Thomas in his bedroom. According to Caldwell, Thomas refused to be threatened and reached for his gun. They struggled and the weapon discharged, killing Thomas instantly." "And Harold? Was he involved in the murder itself?" Grace asked. "Caldwell insists Harold didn't know about the plan to threaten Thomas that night, but he was quick to take advantage of the situation when it went wrong. It was Harold who suggested framing you, Mrs. Garrison, knowing that removing you from the picture would give him control of his brother's estate." "What about Judge Sullivan?" Adam inquired. "Still at large, but we'll find him," Marshal Bridges assured them. "The telegraph lines are humming with his description. He won't get far." He leaned back in his chair. "As of this moment, Mrs. Garrison, you are officially cleared of any involvement in your husband's death. You're free to return to Great Bend whenever you wish." "Thank you, Marshal," Grace said sincerely, "but I think my future lies elsewhere." The formal announcement of Grace's innocence appeared in newspapers across Kansas the following day. The story captivated readers: the wrongfully accused widow, the corrupt judge, the faithful cowboy who stood by her when everyone else believed the worst. Offers of assistance poured in, including several from attorneys eager to help her claim her rightful inheritance from the Garrison estate. 3 months later, with Harold awaiting trial and Judge Sullivan finally captured in Colorado, Grace stood on the broad porch of the house she had shared with Thomas, looking out over the rolling prairie of central Kansas. The Garrison Ranch had been sold to a cattle company from Colorado, fetching a price that ensured Grace's financial independence for the rest of her life. "Having second thoughts?" Adam asked, joining her on the porch. His arm slipped naturally around her waist, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished over the past months. "Not at all," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Just saying a final goodbye to this chapter of my life." Since their return to Great Bend, Adam had been indispensable, helping Grace navigate the legal complexities of settling Thomas's estate and preparing the ranch for sale. Their relationship had blossomed openly, causing inevitable gossip in town, but Grace found she cared little for public opinion after everything she had endured. "The wagon is packed," Adam informed her. "Sophia is meeting us in Council Grove next week. Are you ready to leave?" Grace turned to face him, her blue eyes clear and certain. "More than ready." They had decided to travel west to Colorado, where Adam had connections in the growing cattle industry, and Grace could invest in new ventures without the shadow of the past hanging over her. Sophia would join them, having sold her small homestead to start fresh as well. "Before we go," Adam said, suddenly serious, "there's something I need to ask you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I know it's been only a few months since all this began, and if you think it's too soon, I understand. But I love you, Grace Garrison, and I want to build a new life with you, not as your employee or protector, but as your husband." Grace looked at the ring, then up at Adam's face, the face that had become so dear to her, so essential to her happiness. "Some might say it's too soon to love again," she acknowledged. "But I think when you find the right person, the heart knows, regardless of timing or circumstances." She held out her hand and Adam slipped the ring onto her finger. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile beginning to lift the corners of his mouth. "Yes," Grace confirmed, reaching up to touch his cheek. "1,000 times yes." Adam drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not promise: passion, and the certainty that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. As they rode away from Great Bend that afternoon, Grace felt not grief but gratitude. Thomas had been taken from her through violence and greed, but in her darkest hour, she had found Adam Xavier, a man who believed in her when no one else would, who risked everything to stand by her side, and who now offered her a love she had never expected to find. The sun was setting over the Kansas prairie, painting the endless horizon in shades of gold and crimson, as they headed west toward their new beginning. Grace reached for Adam's hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had found in each other not just love, but home. 5 years later, the town of Silver Creek, Colorado, celebrated the expansion of Xavier Ranch with a community gathering that drew settlers from miles around. The ranch house, spacious but unpretentious, overflowed with guests enjoying music, food, and the legendary hospitality of Adam and Grace Xavier. "Mama, watch me." 4-year-old Thomas Xavier proudly demonstrated his roping skills with a small lariat. his father's patient instruction evident in his technique, despite his tender age. "Very impressive, sweetheart," Grace called from the porch, where she sat with her sister-in-law Sophia and their newest addition, 2-month-old Elizabeth, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "He's the spitting image of Adam," Sophia observed, smiling at her nephew's antics. "With twice the energy," Grace agreed fondly. The past 5 years had brought changes none of them could have anticipated when they first arrived in Colorado. Adam's expertise with cattle had quickly established him as a respected rancher, while Grace's business acumen and capital allowed them to expand steadily. Sophia, meanwhile, had surprised everyone by falling in love with and marrying the local doctor, John Patterson. "Speaking of energy," Sophia said, "here comes your husband with half the county in tow." Adam approached the porch, leading a group of men in animated conversation about breeding stock and grazing rights. He broke away to climb the steps, bending to kiss Grace and peek at his sleeping daughter. "Still showing off the most beautiful baby in Colorado," he teased. "The most beautiful baby ever born," Grace corrected with a smile. "How are the negotiations going? Cooper and Henderson have agreed to our proposal for the shared grazing lands," Adam reported. "It's going to make a significant difference for all the small ranchers in the valley." Their life in Colorado was everything Grace had hoped for: peaceful, purposeful, filled with love and the joy of building something meaningful together. The shadows of the past occasionally surfaced in newspaper reports of Harold Garrison's conviction and imprisonment, or in rare letters from Thomas's sisters, who had eventually acknowledged Grace's innocence, but they no longer held power over her happiness. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Adam found Grace standing alone at the edge of their property, watching the sunset paint the mountains in the distance. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Grace leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "I was thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't believed in me, hadn't stood by me when everyone else was certain of my guilt." "I knew you," Adam said simply. "Not just as Thomas's wife, but as the woman you truly are, strong, honest, compassionate." He turned her gently to face him. "I would have stood by you even if the whole world stood against us." "Lucky for us, it didn't come to that," Grace murmured, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Behind them, little Thomas called out excitedly, breaking the moment. "Papa, Uncle John is showing me how to use a stethoscope," Adam laughed. "Duty calls. Our son may become a doctor yet, despite my hopes for a rancher." "He can be whatever he chooses," Grace said. "That's the gift we're giving our children, the freedom to determine their own paths." As they walked back to the house together, hand in hand, Grace felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. From the darkest moment of her life had come her greatest joy, a love born of courage and faith, tested in adversity, and now flourishing in the life they had built together. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the land that was now their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight was for celebration of family, of community, and of the enduring bond between a woman once wrongfully accused and the cowboy who had known the truth and stood by her, changing both their lives forever.